we're talking Syrian rebel groups. How can you tell them apart? What do they stand for? And who are they backed by? That's what we're looking at today in today's reality show. And are they all, at the end of the day, just a group of savages? Or can we really have hopes for these different rebel groups and working together? We'll talk about that all here on the reality show today. So we're joined by Daniel. Thank you very much for joining us, Daniel. So, what are your first thoughts, Jan, on the current state in Syria, the current makeup of these groups? We've clearly got one that's out in front, but they haven't turned on each other yet. Does that mean they're going to hold together as one homogenous group or work one collaboration, or will we be seeing some splintering? This is one of the key elements of factionalism that could break out in Syria.
So first of all, let me remind people that today's episode of the reality show is sponsored by Jim Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences. More about them later in the video. So when it comes to the current makeup of Syria, the way it's sort of, you have to remember there are still bases under Russian control. Something has to be done about those. As you mentioned, you have the biggest group, the HTS. We'll be talking mainly about them, which are currently holding, let's say, most of the let's say rebel controlled territory if we sort of ignore the Kurdish-led parts. And then you have, I think, the biggest sort of, not necessarily opposition technically, all rebels are currently united under this idea of a transitional government. But you know, when you look at sort of groups, I mean, I named this episode the Syrian Game of Thrones because it is, in some way, you can see the parallels for those who saw it. It's sort of, you know, a bunch of groups with different goals that sometimes unites them and sometimes pushes them against each other. So, you know, until surprisingly, the only thing that united these rebel groups was Assad, and from the, let's say, the negative aspect, and it was them trying to get rid of Assad. Now that they get rid of it, we've talked a little bit about how long will they now stay united after, you know, just this one goal. Seemingly, they are still sort of being united, but we are already, as I talked on the daily objective, we are already see that they do have different goals. I mean, you have the HTS, which is trying to sort of rebuild Syria. You have, or at least seemingly, we'll have to see how it goes, but so far, let's keep it at that. You have the Syrian National Army, which is the rebels supported by Turkey, whose you know, seemingly goal is also uniting Syria or sort of rebuilding Syria. But clearly Turkey's interest in specific Syria is the Kurds. And again, it's to, you know, to put it nicely, to not have them as close to them. So you obviously have a different goal. And then based on what HTS wants, if it wants a truly united Syria with respect for minority groups as they claim to have, you can't have one group trying to kill or trying to take over another group. That's usually not how respect for minority groups works. And of course, you have the Kurdish-led parts who, I mean, whose objective, honestly, is to survive. So, as I say, different goals. Some of them unite them, some of them divide them, and based on how they choose to pursue them, it will really determine the future of Syria.
Yes, indeed. As you mentioned, there are many conflicting interests. For example, the Syrian National Army, the Turkish backed one, only wants to get rid of the Kurds from the Syrian Defense Force. So already we have a built-in conflict there potentially. But the leader of the major faction, the HTS, al-Golani, who has a checkered past at best. You know, it moves from the ISIS Al Qaeda sphere to this more moderate. It reminds me of a kind of jihadi Zelensky. He's got this kind of demeanor on him that it's a kind of warriors, but he wants to be a civilized guy, a guy who does business. So much so that his government has declared, I think today or yesterday, had the first interview, and he declared, well, we are not open to a new war. And he sent a very powerful message to Iran, saying that this is no longer the land where you can do what you want, and you can support people like Hezbollah and interfere through Lebanon, which is at the same time is a very conciliatory way of talking at Israel without directly addressing Israel. So that's promising, and the fact that he's been asking people to go back to work, so certain infrastructure, which is still standing because the war wasn't as devastating as other wars have been. So all the structures are there. People are able to go back to work and restart where they left during the Assad regime. And effectively, after the very shaky weekend period, go back to work and try and restart the economy and try and continue life as it was. But at the same time, there are also we always seen at the end of a regime, especially dictatorial one, there are people who want to equal scores and go after the people that were enabling the dictatorial regime or Assad. So we also have some violence going on at the same time, and it all depends on the balance of this, whether it's going to deteriorate in a worse a civil war, or things can be pulled together. Looks like they can, which is amazing, really.
I think it's very hard to make assessments, to be honest, in these early days. And we've got some conflicting information from different sides. And clearly, one of the problems with analysing HTS is the fact that it has morphed from different things at different times. From 2016, it then started to jettison its Al-Qaeda, ISIS background or affiliations to them, and how it's run the Idlib province. Seems to suggest that it's got some sensible, managerial, civilian infrastructure skills in place when it comes to, running a society. And of course, the guy they put in charge, the Prime Minister Mohammed al-Bashir, who's going to be the interim Prime Minister, he comes from that region as well, I think, or has been integral in keeping that region running smoothly. And therefore, that suggests there's going to be some measure of sensible period of time. Now, on the other hand, of course, you've got the fact that HTS actually stands for Organisation for Liberation of the Levant. Now, I assume we mean liberation from Assad. But of course, at the moment, you've still got that title in your name. Does it mean liberation from wider groups you would rather weren't there? That remains to be seen. And of course, lots of what they've been doing recently, and the most recent acquisition they've managed to make is the oil town in the east, a town called Deir al-Zur. Which is where a lot of the oil supplies are in the eastern part of Syria. They seem to have captured that recently. Now clearly, trying to get hold of the key resources of Syria is going to be key as well. But of course, I read BBC reports which tried to conflate those kind of resources, such as oil, with the resources of weaponry in terms of bases and helicopters, which Israel has been systematically destroying in order to ensure its security. Now, there's two very different kinds of resources, and the word resources shouldn't be used to fudge the difference between the two, but to make sure that the country can function. And one of the things they have been doing, which I think is a good sign, is destroying some of the drug supply in the north, and maybe we'll say a bit more about that later. Have you heard more on that topic, or your early indications of HTS? Do they give you hope, Daniel, when it comes to the possibilities?
So, well, first of all, what one in the chat is asking are Assad force. Is there still Assad loyalist faction there or something? Well, it's important to remember the reason why this let's say offensive happened so fast and so quickly is that basically there were already no Assad loyalists like a month back or for a few years pretty much now. I mean, when it comes to, I mean, the reason why also relatively so few deaths happened over the last few weeks from the offensive was the fact that most of it was just they either joined the rebels or they simply gave up. I mean, there really was no reason to fight. So the only, let's say, Assad loyalists were Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. There was internally there was very little, and the only support really was coming from the outside. I as well as I'm not sure if we heard anything back from Assad. I think we still accept that he's in Russia. I'm not sure if we have any more confirmation on that. But I don't think there's any, we'll just send Assad back and he'll inspire the people to like take back the country or something like that. So I think for the most part that threat, if you want to call that, is gone. And now it is really just these groups that I mean, we'll go one by one. So maybe we should start with the HTS. But well, you asked me if I have any hope. I mean, oftentimes the way, and I mentioned it on the daily objective, the way I look at it, I look at it as sort of with a Western bias. I mean, the only, the only realistic way we should look at it from the perspective of Israel, America, or Western countries is, is threat coming out of them, and if there is, that needs to be eliminated. If that means, I'm not sure if we'll have time to talk about ISIS, but if there are still some possible remnants of the ISIS, I mean, USA bombed them just a few days ago, I believe. So we had more on that. But if there is any resurgence of ISIS there or any other terrorist group that might threaten, directly threaten the Western powers, then actions need to be taken. But as I said, for the sake of all the best within Syrian people, all the rational, innocent people there, I hope for the best. And HTS seemingly is it's all it's hard to sort of put it because I want the best, but if I now say that HTS is good and few days, few weeks, few months from now on they do something bad, I don't think we should be like, oh, but they were good in the past, so maybe we can try to work with them together. No, they have one chance, and if they break it at any time, that's it. And by that I mean, like externally, if they try to threaten Israel or America in any way, that's it.
Yeah, the thing that I like the most, going back to what Bonnie was asking, is that the effectively Assad's army was as good as Saddam Hussein army back in the 90s when Desert Storm occurred. They just weren't able to fight. They just gave up as soon as they saw somebody that looked like an American. Even I remember a case where a group of soldiers surrendered to a bunch of journalists. They saw somebody, give up, don't shoot at me. And this happens because the regime was so incredibly corrupt and propped up by dictatorship like Iran and Russia, which really didn't add anything apart from the fear for the people to try and overthrow Assad himself. So that was, if you like, on the cards. This kind of dictatorship do not last at all. Also in the south, there is another faction, the Syrian Free Army, which is trained and backed up by the US, and they are actually there to keep ISIS in check. They are the people who effectively are around the area of Palmyra. I don't know whether you remember in the early 2010s when IS actually destroyed some human cultural heritage stuff in Palmyra just because it didn't conform with the religions that they're pushing. So all this kind of stuff has been dealt with since back then. And again, another faction that is going to be involved in the whole government of Syria, hopefully from now on.
And I think in answer to Bonnie's question, they've also the drugs element of it is also an answer to that, because the whole drugs operation of the drug was called Captagan, and it's a psychostimulant which has got a massive business within the Middle East. It's a form of phenethylene is the actual it's the actual drug itself, and Capistan is like the name for it, the brand name for it, if you like. And from some of the reports that I've read, it was an industry which was making some say 1 billion, some say 5 billion, but I've read reports that said it had 80% of the market worth 56 billion. So whichever of those numbers is true, it's a substantial amount of money. And the fact that the brother of Bashir al-Assad was running that drugs operation. His name is Maher al-Assad, and that they have been in recent days destroying the drugs factories and destroying the pills in large number. That prevents. That's one of the things which prevents Assad from getting any kind of rehold in the country, together with, of course, all the military infrastructure being destroyed at, good 70-80% by Israel. So, and of course, as you mentioned before, all the forces surrendering. So all of those things suggest this is a one-way ticket now. He's not coming back again. There's no sense of a resurgence. But I don't think that is the threat. I think the threat really is what comes from the rebel factions themselves and what they turn out to be in the long run, because that's really the key question that remains unanswered until we know a little more at the moment. Because obviously the first step is to establish law and order, and of course, but they're presenting the best face they can. Even the fact that he's gone back to his original normal name of Ahmed al-Sharaa. And wore normal clothes, and the beard's a bit smaller, and all of that suggests that he's trying to appeal to a wider audience, also not only for the law and order side, but also with the possibility of unlocking humanitarian aid for the country in the future. Now, that obviously down the line, that can, we all know about humanitarian aid and what that can be funneled into by bad actors, and we would have to see whether he did use it wisely or not when we get to that point. But already countries like the US, like the EU, are having to reconsider whether this is a terrorist organization or not, with a sort of, okay, we might suspend it, we'll see. They're as uncertain as the rest of us as to what this really means. But of course, any regime, as somebody pointed out, as any regime is better. I think it was Blinken said any regime is better than Assad's for the last 50 years. So, and given how torturous and hideous he was to his own people, we can only hope that's true, and that this is a step change away from such hideous times.
Yeah, I mean, even if Assad's regime was the worst thing that happened, sort of implying that now it would be okay to support, HTS. I mean, truly, it's simply not the role of the government to prop up another government or to provide humanitarian aid. You might have a discussion about, sort of quitting the designation or sort of deleting the designation of HTS as a terrorist group, since, if you're a private individual who, let's say, wants to see something better in Syria or wants to provide some humanitarian aid, considering that you would be sending aid to a terrorist organization currently, that's probably not super legal. So, I could see the argument for, quitting the designation. Although, then it should be, of course, once terrorism is committed, just redesignate it again. So, we don't have like citizens of Europe and America propping up a terrorist regime. Something I, sort of want to mention, since we are talking about HTS, because again, I'm really mining this sentence, but someone called, me criticizing HTS as Russian propaganda. And, you can hold two ideas at the same time. You can say Assad's regime was bad, and HTS might not be much better. Uh, but it's I mean it's important. We are acting with the information we have right now and with the information that's possible right now. If Syria becomes the Singapore of the Middle East, and you'll see. Oh, Daniel was saying that HTS is going to be a terrorist group. I mean, I'll eat my words. I don't care. Similar to when I call out Netanyahu and say, well, Netanyahu is preparing like some secret ways to attack others, and when it happens, then I'll take my words back. But I'm working with the information I have right now, and sort of going into the bio of the HTS. As you mentioned, they were Al Qaeda affiliate under the name Nusra Front. They still are a designated terrorist organization. The leader is still a designated terrorist. But so that's the information we have. And on the other hand, you could say, they were acting moderate recently. As I mentioned on the Daily Objective, the leader has probably read why nations fail and is now like trying to put it into reality. And they've tried to moderate. I believe at some point they even got rid of some of the more radical members of that group, some of the more radical elements of the group, as well as the way offensive was waged was done sort of not as like a terrorist organization, but more as like let's say a proper modern military or something more closely to that. So we work with the information we have, and that's what you have to do. But you can't when new information comes out, as I always say, you're not going to be held back by what you said before. You have to act on it immediately. If you are at peace, let's say, as Netanyahu says, they are sort of at peace with Syria right now. And as Netanyahu says, if that changes at the moment, we are striking, and we'll have to hold it again. We are working with the information that Netanyahu will do something about it, but we have to work with what we have right now, and we have to hope that if something does happen, that Netanyahu will act against it. So yeah, that's. I don't know if you have anything more to add on HTS.
No, apart from the fact that on the border, the southwestern border, the one bordering the Golan Heights and the four closer to Israel, is gonna be probably managed by the Druze, who are a limited number of people, about a million people. They are not. Again, there is kind of stateless group. But there will be somebody that Israel will have to deal with. And, it's a good thing that they keep open the option. I mean, the Druze are already living in north of Lebanon. They are part of the group that were hit by the Hezbollah missile when they killed all those children playing football. They were Druze kids. So Israel already has a relationship with the Druze, and it's trying to expand the relationship with the Kurds as well, which historically they were kind of supporting loosely. So all this kind of relationship will be very important, whatever happens to Syria. Syria goes down the way Lebanon did in the 70s, where it was considered, a pearl on the Mediterranean. Good, but if things went a bit worse, so Israel will still have some support, some friends on the other side of the border. And I think it's very important for the stability of the area. But I'll tell you what's happening right now. Some of the new information that came out today is, for example, that there is discontent in Iran, Tehran, in the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are unhappy about the fact that the resources that they had placed in Syria, they would have been part of a very expensive and complex operation that they were running in order to keep control of Syria, and while supporting Assad. So some of the leaders there are not happy at all about the way this has been managed, and about the way that Syria has effectively fallen. They've lost an important pawn in their fight in the area. So there's lots of discontent. I think the Ayatollah Khamenei has removed the guy that was in charge of that part of the operations. So there's lots of internal conflict there, which is good. You know, if a dictatorship like Iran finds itself with some internal conflict, can only resolve it either they eat themselves up, which is good, or they weaken themselves, and the people around might be able to finally throw out this bunch of clowns, really. So yeah, it's all up in the air, but you know, every day looks a bit better. Let's hope this one lasts.
And Netanyahu's been trolling the Iranians, quite frankly, on Twitter by talking about the fact that how much of their money they've flushed down the toilet in Syria and by their support of Hezbollah. And of course, you know, that's why they're at each other's throats. And I think the al-Quds leader is getting it in the neck in Iran, probably quite literally. So.
Funny enough, there is if you have a chance to see it, there is the cover of the Tehran Post that has a picture of the Israeli on a high ground looking over Syria, and the caption is Israel abuses the fall of the Assad regime and attacks Syria. It's like total propaganda from the Iranians, but also shows how hurt they are by these events.
Of course, one of the interpretations of that is to whether they go even harder and faster towards a nuclear program. Now all the rest of their ring of fire has fallen apart. But of course, we hope that will swiftly be bombed into oblivion in a matter of weeks. That would be the best outcome, certainly. But just since you mentioned the Druze militia down on the southern corner, because I think there are 1 million Druze. I think they're slightly spread out across several countries, but there's certainly a great big cluster down in that corner, and they've been operating together with some other groups, what they called the Southern Operation Room down there, and I think that was one of the areas where you were seeing some anti-government protests for a few weeks, and that was one of the thorns in the side of the Assad government, which they obviously couldn't put down, thankfully. And together with what was happening with the other rebels, it was effectively a joint effort to bring down the Assad government. So, which group would you like to go to next, Daniel? We can talk about anything with Syrian in it, basically.
First of all, can you remind people of today's sponsor of the reality? You're muted.
Its Consequences by Jim Brown, and just to give you a little flavor of that, this book is for anyone who wants to understand money creation in the modern economy. In the following pages, Jim Brown will explain how money is created, who creates it, and the consequences of money creation, both good and bad. So whether you're an investigator navigating volatile markets, a student searching for understanding, or a conscientious voter who wants to stay well informed, this book is for you. Get ready to have your assumptions challenged as we dive headfirst into what he calls the black hole of economic knowledge. After reading this book, you'll emerge with insights that will transform your perspective on money, banks, and their impact on your life. And I can absolutely recommend this book. It's excellent, and all the proceeds from it, all the royalties from it, go to supporting the Ayn Rand Centre UK. And we thank Jim very much and everyone who's buying this book for their support. So Daniel, other groups within Syria, and we could talk about those backed by the Kurds or the Turks, whichever you'd like to tackle next.
Well, first, let me read a few super chats. We have actually member super chat from Mark. Thank you so much. He said, "Good afternoon. Would like to know of the rebels' Russia stand and whether Syrian embassy should be expelled to prevent terrorism. Reading suggested. I don't know what rebels' Russia stand is. I'm wondering if you guys know. When it comes to the idea of Syrian embassies being expelled, I mean, there is very little reason for countries to even have embassies. So like from purely, let's say, the sort of, I think, objectivist view of government, there is very little reason to even have embassies. And so, I mean, I wonder what I'm sort of like, I could be sort of in like the current context. Sorry, in like a current context, I could be persuaded both ways. If there is a provable case that there might be like terrorism coming out of Syrian embassies, I mean, I don't necessarily see why would that change over day. I think even if something like that happens, it will probably change, take some time. And even then, I think, yeah, I could be persuaded both ways if that is a case, but I'm not. I don't think that's the biggest issue that we have to deal with right now.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Russia, I think first of all, you've got the fact that allegedly, and there's no real way of knowing how true this is, but it certainly sounds convincing. Allegedly, Russia accepted taking Bashir because they'd done a deal with Assad to keep their bases on the Mediterranean. Now they were doing a deal with a regime that was falling. So how much that deal can last beyond the fall of that regime, particularly I doubt would have anticipated, even the Russians would have anticipated Israel's move in destroying so much of the Syrian infrastructure, military infrastructure, and the port of Latakia, for example, which they bombed where the Syrian navy was. Now, there's been reports that the Russians have been withdrawing from their port and Tartus, I think it is, on the coast of the Mediterranean, and of course, the extent to which that's true or not true is a little unknown. I doubt that the Russians have direct lines to HTS. They may be trying to develop them as much as they can in order. I'm sure they promised the moon in order to retain those bases. But whether HTS recognizes that what they really need on side at the moment is the US. For one, and the international community for the humanitarian aid, for the support to allow them to even form a government, or at least the fact that they won't interfere and bring it down, especially with Trump coming in. Who knows? So I think the attitude towards the Russians up until now, everything has been about getting Assad out of power. So now that he is out of power, the extent to which you thought any of these groups have really thought beyond that in terms of allegiances after the event, particularly with the speed of it, is hard to say. But I don't see at the moment worrying signs that they're going to link with Russia, but Russia is extremely good at manipulating difficult situations and sticking their paws in and using every opportunity to meddle among chaos. So we'll find out, I guess.
Although Russia's position is quite unique right now, because yes, they managed to get hold of the bases in exchange for bombing Aleppo when in 2011, when the civil war starts. But Putin now is facing another challenge, which is Ukraine. In Ukraine, in fact, it looks like it's been providing drones to the HTS and people trained to use the drones. So part of the headache for Russia is that by opening so many fronts, spreading itself so thinly, it's left itself open to, serious bloody noses, which has been receiving fairly regularly. So the situation in Syria itself might well see a very weakened Russia's presence and unable even probably to keep its assets, which would be quite a turnout for books, really, because those bases are the unique access that Russia has onto the Mediterranean directly.
And the super chat there was referring to embassies. I was particularly pleased to see a picture of the Iranian embassy within Damascus with its doors flung open and the Iranian flag on the ground, suggesting that you've properly routed the Iranians from Damascus. And of course, that explains that infighting we were talking about earlier in Tehran. So Daniel, how about the other two groups? Should we talk about the Syrian Democratic Forces?
I'd rather, because we don't have much time, I'd rather we talk about the Syrian National Army. First, let me read also a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. Jim, he says, Jim's book is excellent and the show real value, so please show your support to ARCUK. Also, a reminder, all proceeds from the book go towards the support of Ayn Rand Centre UK, so you can educate yourself and also help us keep on the air and hopefully get me a better travel kit so I can make better shows even when I'm traveling. But yeah, when it comes to, I think it's important to talk about the Syrian National Army because I still see them as the biggest obstacle towards some sort of, let's say, stable future or some sort of better future. So just a reminder, Syrian National Army, despite its name, is not like the actual national army. It's a bunch of militia supported by Turkey. They were sent into Syria in 2016 to push Kurdish groups and also Islamic State away from its borders. It's sort of hard to remember that, but ISIS used to be really big in Syria as well as Iraq. It was like the size of it was incredible that basically it's sort of all forces in a way united against ISIS. While now ISIS isn't really that big of a problem, the Syrian National Army is almost exclusively focused on the Kurds. It did help the HTS during the offensive. It did join, but there were a lot of clashes also between HTS and Syrian National Army, as well as not Syrian National Army and the Kurds. So I think honestly that's going to be the biggest problem. Of course, Turkey's goal is to create some sort of buffer zone between Kurds because of their alleged ties to the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is also a designated terrorist organization by the US also. So I think yeah, Syrian National Army is something that HTS will have to deal with if you want to have a united nation, if you want to have some sort of respect for minority groups, as they claim. You can't have Syrian National Army just fighting Kurds every day, unless you wanna sort of kick both of them out of the future of Syria or some kind of, just create Syria without them, which I don't think is really well, I guess we might see, but if you really want united Syria, something has to be done about the Syrian National Army. And I mentioned what I mentioned on TDL, the fact that you have two NATO sort of allies of allies fighting against each other is should really make you think. Basically, Syrian National Army is supported by Turkey, a NATO member, and the Kurds being supported by the US to large extent still, mainly to fight the ISIS. The US bases in the Kurdish part were put up there mainly to fight ISIS. But there are bases there, and if Turkey, if the not Turkish forces, but Turkey supported forces get close to the American bases, well, it will be an American problem. They are, I think, almost 1,000 Americans in the Kurdish part. So something has to be dealt with there. I'm assuming it's not yet sort of the number one goal, but for the future stability, it will have to be pretty soon, or it doesn't matter if you manage to recreate the Ministry of Healthcare or the Ministry of Agriculture when you have half of your nation split against each other again.
Yeah, of course, and the Syrian National Army is made up also of it's a rat bag of people, really. It's lots of them were expelled by the US because they were considered either too crazy, really, or too extremist, or they weren't suitable for the free army that the US was supporting. And they ended up working for Erdogan. Erdogan, who's the Turkey president, who doesn't miss a chance to try and push back on the Kurds. So he got them in as mercenary. So I question how effective um, an army made of this kind of people is in the first place. And Erdogan's might well regret getting involved in this one because, especially if Israel starts supporting the Kurd somehow, it could be an interesting one. I mean, there's no love lost between Turkey and Israel right now, and Erdogan has been quite open at being incredibly anti-Semitic. He's even hosting the leadership of Hamas right now, so it's quite open about being anti-Israel. So if this goes down the route, could get quite nasty for him. But frankly, I hope his miscalculation might end up in him losing power and being removed in Turkey. That would be a great outcome out of this because we see kind of ripples going beyond the area right now. For example, today there was a suicide bombing in Afghanistan, which took out a member of the Taliban. ISIS did that, which means that they're trying to position themselves, perhaps because they've seen they're losing support in Syria, so they're trying to place themselves in Afghanistan. Anyway, whatever the reason is, there is a bit of readjustment here. So I think in the next few months we'll see some interesting development, and hopefully, as I mentioned earlier on, it's going to be development that guarantees a sort of stability and a more peaceful outlook for the area because the reducing interference of Iran and Russia, once they're eliminated, and Iran might be properly eliminated soon, hopefully, that might well see a good future for the area, really.
And I think when it comes to Erdogan and the Turkish forces, I think it's important to understand that point about the Syrian National Army. That sounds like a very unified body, doesn't it? And when you consider what a fragmented group even that is, even before you consider how it interplays with some of the other groups, then you really get a picture of it's held together till now by a single goal and or certainly a goal that's been they've been keen on up until now, and we'll have to see what happens when Erdogan will he continue to pay those rejects, those thuggish rejects that the US didn't want, $100 a month, or will he need to keep paying them? And what will he do when he decides he doesn't want to pay them anymore? It's particularly if he has created a sufficient buffer between Turkey and Syria, or to what extent will they continue their pursuit of? I mean, I think we covered it on the show the other day. The town of Manbij, which is apparently 60% taken over. I hope I'm saying that right. Sounded like Manbij when I said it then, but Manbij, which is taken over 60%. Excuse me. Amuse myself then. Taken over 60% by the Turkish forces, and we'll have to see whether they continue to take over the entire thing or whether the Kurdish forces fight back in that area or not. So that's a bit of a crunch point as well. To move over to the Kurdish forces, just whilst we've got time, that's the Syrian Democratic Forces. The Kurdish forces making up about 10% of the population of Syria. And of course, they were formed. Well, they've been around for a long time, but they were particularly integral in the defeat of ISIS and received a lot of support from the US at the point when ISIS was defeated back in 2019. So, Daniel, did you want to comment on them?
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, I'm wondering, do you think there are like MAGA people in Turkey? Like, why are we sending money into Syria when we have to spend, or homeless people in Ankara or something like that? I'm wondering about it. But yeah, talking about the Syrian Democratic Forces, they were renamed to that originally. It was the Kurdish like People's Protection Unit, and the Kurdish led, I think, is the important part there. It's important to not forget not forget. This is not like it's 100% Kurdish chef. That are also type uh, different groups that are just biggest part that
May well have been disconnected there, Daniel. So you were talking about the future of
Yeah, so I was talking about how sort of similar to Iraq, you have sort of the let's say the autonomy of the Kurds in the north, in the northern parts, and it looks like when we talk about the specific goals of each group, it seems like also in Syria, the sort of goal of the Kurdish-led forces currently are to have some sort of autonomy, there's some sort of independence, which doesn't necessarily go against the current goals of the HTS, but it definitely goes against the goals of the Syrian National Army. So we'll have to see. That's why I think the Syrian National Army is the biggest problem. I think you could have the Kurdish forces and the HTS sort of like aligning themselves on the future of Syria, while not necessarily sure, with the Syrian National Army.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Islamic State itself has got some pockets still of support in different areas, or at least there's some remnants of it. And one of the concerns is the prisons within Syria. And as they attempt to break into the prisons and free prisoners, a lot of those are former ISIS people. And of course, those are the kind of prisoners you don't want released back into society. They can act as a serious, strengthening grouping point for that kind of jihadist ideology, and that's going to run counter to any chance that Syria has of a peaceful future. So we'll have to see where that leads. And of course, there's the US itself with its base in Syria with 900 troops in Syria, down on the border with Jordan. Presumably they're going to continue to hold that base for the time being, but all of that depends on what happens all around them, and that is again something that we'll tell in the future.
Yeah, Daniel, now that you're back in Slovakia, have you got any closing words and where people can find out more about you?
Yeah, as always, you can find me on my YouTube channel, Dan. Not much there right now, but I'll as always, I'll try to come up with some stuff to do there, especially with all that's going on in Slovakia right now. It's fun stuff, at least for me right now. I'm putting at 90% the idea of early elections in Slovakia in the next year. So, I'm pretty happy about that. I'm wishing for elections in Syria, not that elections sort of magically solve everything. But I think, especially if you have the possibility of, let's say, better parts of Syria coming up on top, I think it's good to have the sort of, the consent of the governed. I think it's important to running a nation and to sort of to the sort of nation population's participation in government. But currently HTS is sort of against the idea of elections, which again doesn't necessarily make it or break it. We'll follow it closely and we'll see where we'll go from here. I'll just mention, I think most important, Syrian National Army, I think is going to be the biggest thorn in the side of the new Syria and will have to be dealt with, because I'm not undermining the threats from Iran or possibly Hezbollah, but those sort of can be united, the nation can be united again, while internal divides are ones that are much harder to heal.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. And just a reminder, one more time, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences by Jim Brown, our sponsor today of today's show, and a book you should definitely check out. Please do so. And in terms of checking out our content, Marco?
Yeah, you can go to the sister channel to ARCUK, the briefly objective, where you can find short content, shorts, videos, talking about most of the issues we've been talking about until now. So subscribe, comment, and share.
And thank you very much to our super chatters today and to Daniel for being with us. And we'll be back again tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Till then, cheers.